So the last video did awesome, and I thank you guys so much for that. I'm extremely excited to continue refining the progression line and updating my flowchart. In order to do that, I wanted to figure out if grinding tier 5 vampires is actually as effective as people say or not. But before we get into it, I do want to ask you guys to please scroll down and subscribe. Every subscription helps me out immensely, as we are only 700 subscribers off of 30k and the YouTube rank. So please scroll down, hit that subscribe button, and let's get back into the video. So once again, I immediately got to work. But you may or may not be noticing something. I already have all of the rift done. Actually, I am still in my original profile. Why, you may ask? Well, for a couple of reasons. First, most people don't want to watch a video on content they have already completed. So I personally feel that progressing through the rift again would be very redundant. Second, I need coins on my main profile. But Yadi, you have an 8.5 bill coin purse. Yeah, I know it may seem to many like I do not need coins, but I promise I have a good reason. I want to finish maxing out my museum. In order to do that, I need to drop at least 5 billion coins. That's a lot of coinage. I also need to build a second term, finally, with Soul Eater on it so that I can play tank and healer in dungeons. Because they're the only classes I have left. This is going to cost me around another 1.2 billion coins. These two reasons, on top of being able to build coins for skins and new updates, led me to doing this on my main. But don't worry, everyone can get to the same point I'm at in the rift and have the same exact gear. The only difference will possibly be the magic find from your beacon and the magic find from Necron's ladder, which I have completed. Keep in mind that even on a new profile, a beacon can be unlocked and produced in a matter of days, but it is decently pricey for a new profile. Is it worth it? No clue. Depends on whether or not you think magic find is a scam. So anyway, I immediately went to the rift and started grinding tier 5 vampires. It is important to note that I do have max gear in the rift, as well as every talisman you could possibly have, especially a vampire dentist relic. I would recommend that you completely max your gear and tallies in the rift before attempting to consistently do tier 5 vampires, or you're going to have a hard time. Let me tell you, I had a rough time. In my defense, I had not done tier 5 vamps consistently ever. I only ever did one kill to complete the Skyblock XP, and I had not grinded Vampire Slayer in at least over a year. So I had some relearning strats and muscle memory to do. This was to be expected, but definitely wasn't any less frustrating. And if you know me, I tend to get frustrated. One other thing to note before I get into this, I wanted to test this method completely solo first, before trying to get a loot share party. The reason why is because there are so many methods that are better with other people, but then you have to deal with other people's downtime and their schedules. The mark of a truly good money-making method is if it is also viable solo, so that is what I will be starting with. The first hour was tough. I died more than I completed tier 5 bosses. I ended up with 6 deaths and 5 boss completions in 56 minutes, and then I rage quit. In this time, I actually completed my first boss in forever and dropped a McGrubber's burger. If only this was worth more money and I could drop these just as easily when I was going for Skyblock XP. Outside of the burger, I was only able to produce 88.9k motes from drops. Motes from kills don't build up because they are immediately spent on spawning the boss. Speaking of McGrubber's burgers, in order to make this method more effective, you should try to not sell any drops, but specifically enchanted vampiric melons until you have claimed all 5 McGrubber's burgers. The reason for this is because each McGrubber's burger that you consume increases the amount of motes from sold drops by 5%, capping at 25%. 25% more motes is insanely massive, especially when part of this money-making method is converting motes to coins via the Rift Prism. In order to purchase a Rift Prism, you will need somewhere around 8 million motes, maybe more, maybe less. This fluctuates based upon whether Diaz is mayor, and who is buying the prisms. Diaz has a perk that doubles the amount of quantity sold in Rift Shens, which in theory should drop the amount of motes you need to spend in order to obtain a Rift Prism. Rift Prisms have gone up in price since I originally bought mine, and they sell for around 1 billion coins now. This means that each singular mote you produce converts to about 123 coins, as long as it goes into purchasing a Rift Prism. If you don't purchase a Rift Prism, the motes are worth nothing. It will take a little while to produce this amount of motes, so be ready to put in some time grinding vampires. Now I know some of you may or may not have just heard me say I have a Rift Prism. This is correct, and therefore, whenever I need to enter the Rift, I can do so free of charge, without having to spend bits or Grand XP bottles. However, I will be tracking how many times I have to enter the Rift in each hour. Like for the first hour, I entered the Rift 4 separate times. This would equate to 640k coins of Grand XP bottles if they were bought from the Mage Emissary. I learned a couple things in this first hour, mostly the relearned strats and muscle memory, but things such as how it is possible to speed up the boss and profits per hour by bulldozing the second combat phase before the vamp gets to his Stone Wrath, and by bulldozing the final phase to get it into stake range. However, this is very risky. This may be a little confusing to new players, but don't worry, you'll pick up on the terminology as we continue through the video. The last phase spawns a Blood Ichor and a Killer Spring at the same time, so if you cannot kill the boss fast enough or are knocked away by the gargoyle spawned, you might be cooked. However, if you can bulldoze it quickly enough, this will speed up your boss times considerably. This should always be done when loot sharing because double the damage. I did find out that it is actually better value to convert the Bubble Blisters and other drops from vampire bosses into motes, as long as those motes are converted with all 5 McGrubber's burgers and are used to purchase a Rift Prism. I did some research on Reddit before even trying this method to see if it was viable, and most people with 600 kills or more said they average around 9 to 10 kills an hour, and from what I'm seeing, this is definitely accurate. You can spawn and kill a boss about every 5 minutes, but if you factor in competition, spawns, getting effigies, taking time to enter and buy Grand XP bottles, and the occasional death, it would come out to about 9 to 10 kills per hour. I believe this is solo, but I'm not 100% sure. The second hour of attempts went slightly better, with me having improved some aspects of the boss. I was able to complete 7 kills and 4 deaths in just 54 minutes. And then I rage quit again. I had time to do one more boss, but the previous boss I did killed me and I got very demotivated. This time I was able to optimize entries and it only cost me 3 entries for the entire hour. This hour was slightly less RNG, amounting to about 85k motes, but I ran into something that I had not run into yet. People stealing vampire kills. The one issue with the entry into the Rift costing money is that it is much harder to swap lobbies unless you have a Rift Prism. Because of this, if you enter a lobby with a lot of competition for vamp kills, then you run into some bad eggs that will try to steal your vamps. Please do not do this. It is not worth it. It wastes time for the both of you and will likely lead to a vamp kill war. However, if someone is stealing vamps from you, I am going to show you a method to stop them. This should only be used in self-defense, like Taekwondo or whatever the actual thing is. The sandwich chop that Mordecai and Rigby used. Only for self-defense. All you have to do is stop swinging at your vamp until it is one hit, then immediately kill it. If the person following you sees you do this enough, they will get annoyed and leave because they cannot steal your kills. I've actually had a standoff with someone before when the thrall was 2 hits away from death and neither one of us wanted to swing at it because neither one of us wanted to get the kill stolen. The other annoying thing about doing tier 5 vamps is that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of inputs. And while some of you might find that specifically annoying, that's not really what I'm talking about. It is extremely hard to keep track of your boss's inputs when someone spawns their boss directly on top of you, even if it's a lower tier boss. The sound effects go off for both bosses, and if you accidentally hit their boss, then you get roped into doing 2 bosses at the same time. It just makes it harder for both of you. I wish there was a way to toggle the noises of other people's bosses, but keep yours on. I don't know if a mod can achieve this, or if Hypixel can change this in an update, but I would love for this to be done. Because of people spawning their boss on top of mine, this led to a couple deaths. And unfortunately for me, I can try spawning my boss far away from other players, but then I am at a terrain disadvantage. In my personal opinion, I think the best place to spawn the boss is in the large part of the courtyard, with the most space and the best chance of seeing the Blood Ichor. If you miss the Blood Ichor, you are cooked. You can also make a case for the cliff, but the issue with the cliff is when people try to loot share, your boss will get knocked off the edge of the cliff. While I'm giving tips, I'd also like to give the tip of doing the boss in third person. It definitely feels very weird at first, but it is way easier keeping track of where everything is and doing everything. I've also seen people do tier 4 Blaze in third person, so maybe doing this during Vampire will be good practice for Blaze. Who knows? It was at this point I decided to do some math, even though I really didn't have a good hour yet. Just from the motes I was producing, I was making about 12.5 mil per hour. That's not great, but if I could shore up my deaths, I could probably make closer to 18 to 20 mil per hour, and if I started dropping the 1 books and unfanged vampire parts, I could start making some real cash. I was definitely going to do a few more hours solo to confirm the 18 to 20 mil per hour, as long as I didn't die. The main money maker of this boss is the 1 book drop, so that is what I had my RNG meter on. It takes 12.5k meter XP in order to guarantee the 1 dropping, which equates to 83 1/3 bosses done. If you can do 10 bosses an hour, that's 1.5k meter XP per hour, which would equate to you dropping the 1 book in 8.3 hours. If it's sold at 60 mil, keep in mind price fluctuates and you can hold it until it goes higher, that's a bonus 7.2 mil per hour. What this means is that if you can only do 10 bosses per hour, you at the very least will be making 25.2 mil per hour on the low end, with only metered books. The high end is very, very high, probably closer to 50-60 mil per hour. Now, keep in mind this does require you to go until at least 8 million motes, which if you can average 150k motes per hour off of some loot share from the lobby, this will take about 53 1/3 hours. At the end of that grind, on the low end, you would make 1,343,000,000 coins. The only downside is that you cannot switch off of this money making method once you have started it. Otherwise, you won't realize your gains. Once you commit to it, you have to purchase a Rift Prism. Bringing us into hour 3, I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of this. I had 8 successful bosses and only 4 deaths. The hour actually started with 7 successful bosses. I was cruising. And then I started dying a lot due to not being able to see the Blood Ichors. I finally decided to turn on the Blood Ichor highlight in SBE, otherwise known as Skyblock Extras. There's also a Blood Ichor highlight from the mod Skyhanny, which is a free alternative mod. Both can be found in my Discord, linked in the description. I did not know this at the time, but Skyblock had recently updated, and because of this, the Blood Ichor highlights on either mod were not working. So I had to sit down and keep grinding everything the old hardcore fashioned way. One of my deaths came because of someone trying to help loot share the boss before the last phase. If this was any other tier of vampire, it wouldn't have mattered. However, tier 5s are different. Tier 5s have this ability called the Blood Ichor, which I mentioned before. And what it does is if it is not destroyed by the Twin Claws ability from the boss, you know, like the little claws that fly at you from the boss that say Twin Claws, within 25 seconds, you die. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're dealt 100 hearts of damage and instant death. Because of the nature of the Twin Claws, if another player starts damaging your boss, they have a chance to get targeted by the Twin Claws ability instead of you. What this means is if they are not standing in line with the Blood Ichor, it will not be destroyed. And there is nothing you can do about it but accept your fate. So public service announcement. When loot sharing any vampire boss, but especially tier 5s, don't loot share until the last phase of the boss. It will just benefit everybody involved. This hour, I had way more success when only trying to skip the second phase before Stone Wrath and not bulldoze the last phase unless I had a random loot sharer helping me. Otherwise, the last phase is a race between the Killer Spring and you. Treating the phase normally ensures that you didn't just waste the last 5 minutes of your life trying to save 5 seconds. This hour was the first hour I had success in the drops department, and I dropped my first ever the 1 book. It was extremely gratifying to finally drop something good, which also happened to be selling for between 60 and 65 mil at the time. Aside from the 1 dropping, this hour was also more profitable from some of the smaller drops. I produced a total of 142,000 motes. Converted to coins would be about 17.5 mil, plus another 65 mil from the 1, mustering a whopping 82.5 mil made in just this 1 hour. For a profile that's going to be roughly 15 hours old, that's extremely good. Uncomparable to any other money-making method. In hour 4, I absolutely cooked. I started out with 2 deaths, but then went 10 straight kills without a death. Unfortunately, the game didn't reward me for this with good drops, and I didn't end up making a whole lot this hour. I am really wishing that Skyhandy waypoints worked for Blood Ichors, because both of my deaths came from not being able to see the Ichor spawns, even when fighting in third person. Half of the time, if I wasn't crazy, I would have sworn they were invisible or inside of blocks. During this hour, I entered the Rift 3 times, which was becoming consistent, and produced only 80k motes. This is on the very low side, because I only dropped an uncommon book bundle and a Guardian Lucky Block, as well as 2 Soul Twist runes. This hour had a ton of potential to be good, but just wasn't. This also means I only produced roughly 10 mil worth of motes. So now, what I wanted to do, after getting a hang of the boss and testing how much a solo player could make, I wanted to start loot sharing other bosses. If I didn't mention this before, the raids above were completely solo, so that anyone can compare to them. Now, I would be changing it up. I had a decision to make. Do I stream and form a sweaty party and farm tier 5s to see how much we could potentially make, or do I just start loot sharing off of randoms in the lobby, which would increase randomness because of the tier of the bosses, how many times they are dying, and how many people are doing vamp per lobby. I decided to leave it to the heavens and flip a coin. Heads for beast mode party, or at least beast mode as stream chat can be. Tails for random lobby loot share. And it was heads. Too bad. It's too late to stream, so I decided to go with finding randoms in the lobby and loot share off of. Little did I know, it was going to go amazingly. So maybe it's better I didn't stream this. Starting off the 5th hour, I did a dum-dum and forgot to record this hour on OBS, which definitely sucks. But luckily, I did not have a crazy drop. This hour was randomly loot shared from the lobby, accounting for 2 tier 5s loot shared, 2 tier 4s, 3 tier 3s, and just 1 tier 2. I also cruised, once again, with 11 bosses killed and just 1 death. I realized during this hour that you should be loot sharing bosses of all tiers, not just tier 5s and 4s, because you can drop the other vampire drops, such as the fantastic chocolate cookie that sell for a solid amount of motes. My only death this hour was, you guessed it, from someone trying to loot share before the last phase and taking the twin claws away from my blood ichor. Very, very sad. I was this close to a flawless, perfect hour. I produced a total of 162.5k motes this hour, dropping 3 uncommon book bundles, 1 chocolate chip cookie, 1 guardian block, and 3 bubba blisters. None of these drops being insane, but converting motes into prisms money means I made 20 mil that hour. That is incredibly good. Imagine what you could do if you were in a lobby where people were constantly killing vamps. My first 2 lobbies, I was only able to loot share 1 tier 5 and 1 tier 3. The rest of the loot share came from the final lobby in which I had time left over. Loot sharing the lobby while doing tier 5 vamps is something that everyone can do, even without any other players. And while it would be better to have a party and the results can vary, I can safely say that this hour was incredibly good, even without any crazy RNG drops. Beginning hour 6, I dropped some Yadi RNG. I guess I have something for dropping the 1 on my first boss of the hour, because I dropped my second ever The 1 book. This hour was great. 10 kills, only 1 death that came at the end of the boss because it did not register me icing. It was so sad. The boss was literally stakeable too, and I couldn't hit it through the gargoyle spawns. This was the first hour I had a consistent loot share, his IGN being slickest cannon, and I randomly found him in the lobby doing tier 4s. He joined the party I invited him to, and we kept swapping off tier 5s and tier 4s, which was great for the both of us. He was an Iron Man going for the 1 books, and I just wanted as many loot shares as possible for the extra motes and possible unfanged vampire part, which, when crafted into vampire dentist relics, sold for 64 mil each. I can definitely feel myself getting way more consistent the more bosses I do, and with a consistent loot share, I feel like I'm starting to get up into those 36 mil to 42 mil per hour rates, which is absolutely amazing for somebody who just started the game. It will allow you to accumulate wealth so quickly, and convert that wealth into the main parts of the game with weapons such as the Hyperion and the Terminator. This hour I produced 137,000 motes, on top of another 65 mil coins from the one book. This hour converted to coins, I produced 17 mil worth of motes, which would be 82 mil total. Extremely good for just an hour of work. I entered the rift 3 times just like normal, and I was actually able to min-max this lobby by warping in and out to refresh time, and not having to refresh effigies at the beginning every single time. I figured it'd save time to refresh them while I was waiting for his boss to get into the last phase, and I was right. I finished the hour with like 15 minutes of rift time to spare, the most I've had yet. Hour 7 did not go great in terms of my bosses, but it was absolutely nuts for loot share. Once again, was somebody random I found and partied. His name is Gratuitz. Extremely goated gamer. I had 8 successful bosses and 4 deaths, but more loot share from tier 4s than I could keep track of. Not only was I trading with Gratuitz, but we were constantly in a vampire lobby with tons of other people doing tier 4s. It may slow down the spawning process of my tier 5s, but it is almost always worth waiting or the downtime of spawning in order to loot share off the other bosses. This hour was awesome. Once again, I started off the hour with the one drop, almost like it's starting to become my signature move, dropping expensive drops right away. It's always the first boss of the hour. I also dropped my first unfanged vampire part of the entire grind, and it was from a loot share off of Gratuit's boss. Don't worry, he ended up loot sharing an unfanged vampire part off of me later on. Some of my deaths this hour were stupid deaths, like my roommate talking to me so I couldn't focus. I was also being swarmed by a guy in a lobby, making it hard to hit the boss and even see the boss. I guess I probably should have been nicked. And I had a Bloodicker spawn 20 feet in the air, something I have never seen before. It just looked completely absurd, so I obviously didn't see it and died. I think the way Blood Ickers spawn is there has to be a line of sight from the head of the boss to the block that the Icker wants to spawn on. That's why they don't spawn with a wall between the boss and the Blood Icker. However, in this case, I think they need to change it so the Blood Icker will only spawn on a block that the head of the boss has line of sight of the top side of the block. This would eliminate Blood Icker spawning on railings and on top of walls, because the boss wouldn't be able to see the top face of that block. This hour I produced 144.6k motes. If you convert them into Prism coins, this is 17.8 mil per hour, plus another 65 mil for the one, plus another 65 mil for the Vampire Dentist relic, and that is 147.8 mil worth of drops in 1 hour. Absolutely insane. I had been taking breaks between hours up until this point, but it was going great with Gratuitz, so I decided to piggyback hour 8 off of hour 7. Thank God I did, because this hour was unarguably the best hour. 11 kills, no deaths, and once again, tons and tons of loot share. In the last hour, I finally achieved my flawless hour. Unfortunately, I did not have the crazy hour I had in hour 7 with a book and a vampire drop. Well, wouldn't you know it, I dropped another The One book. Absolutely bananas. I'd also like to shout out Lackio1 because they asked for a shout out. If you guys see me in a lobby and are nice to me, maybe I'll shout you out next video. I have discovered many more little niche things that will help you out with your bosses, especially if you have a loot sharing partner. You can actually kill the gargoyles and destroy the killer spring that spawn without getting roped into having to do manias or stealing twin claws. This is extremely useful for helping your partner kill the 3rd damage phase before Stone Wrath happens. Doing this will speed up your bosses. This can also be used to help randoms in the lobby kill their boss faster so you can loot share more bosses. You can juggle mobs to kill them slightly faster, because each mob has some invincibility frames that you cannot hit it during. But if you swap between 2 or more mobs, the invincibility frames of the first mob are gone by the time you go to the second and then back. This is not going to drastically change anything, but it is good to know. I actually did figure this out the first time I did the Rift originally when it came out, but I had forgotten about it until recently. In hour 8, I produced a total of 137,500 motes. When converted to coins, this is 16.9 mil, plus 65 mil from the one that I dropped, totaling 82 million coins produced this hour. take some of that away because I need some of these coven seals to craft a vampire dentist relic from before. Now here's the data from all 8 hours. The total amount of motes produced over the span of 8 hours, just off of drops, was 1,071,000. If you convert all these motes into Rift Prism coins, it is 132 million coins. 65 mil added on top of the ones I dropped is 260 mil, plus another 65 mil from the unfanged vampire part I dropped, totaling the money made if motes were all converted into a Rift Prism at 457 million coins. In 8 hours, that's 57 mil per hour. And that's without loot sharing at all for the first 4 hours, along with the learning curve of how much I was dying. Imagine if I would have just done 8 hours without having any of the crazy amount of deaths and loot sharing the first 4 hours. This is nuts! This method has the potential to make so much money. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Turns out, tier 5 vampires are absolutely goated for early game money making methods, as long as you have a decent amount of ping and have the skill and the practice to actually complete tier 5 bosses. So take the information from this video with what you will. If you want to go try tier 5 vamps, go ahead and do it. Maybe this video will push more people to get into vampire lobbies and there'll be even more loot share and even more money to go around. So if you are still watching at this point, I would appreciate if you guys would subscribe. We are on the cusp of YouTube rank, just 700 subs away. So please, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe. Comment and like the video as well for the algorithm. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.